If you've ever wondered why the cost of prescription drugs in the United States are the highest in the world, or why it's illegal to import cheaper drugs from Canada or Mexico, you need look no further than the pharmaceutical lobby and its influence in Washington, D.C. According to a new study by the Center for Public Integrity, congressmen are outnumbered 2-to-1 by lobbyists for an industry that spends roughly $100 million a year in campaign contributions and lobbying expenses to protect its profits. And one reason those profits have exceeded Wall Street's expectations is the Medicare prescription drug bill. It was passed 3.5 years ago, but its effects are still reverberating through the halls of Congress, providing a window into how the lobby works.
Mr. Speaker, I request a recorded vote.
The unorthodox roll call on one of the most expensive bills ever placed before the House of Representatives began in the middle of the night, long after most people in Washington had switched off C-SPAN and gone to sleep. The only witnesses were congressional staffers, hundreds of lobbyists, and U.S. representatives like Dan Burton of Illinois and Walter Jones of North Carolina.
The pharmaceutical lobbyists wrote the bill. The bill was over 1,000 pages, and it got to the members of the House that morning, and we voted for it at about 3 a.m. in the morning.
Why did the vote finally take place at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Well, I think a lot of the shenanigans that were going on that night, they didn't want on national television in prime time.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order.
Steve, I've been in politics for 22 years, and it was the ugliest night I have ever seen in 22 years.
The legislation was the cornerstone of the Republicans' domestic agenda and would extend limited prescription drug coverage under Medicare to 41 million Americans, including 13 million who had never been covered before. At an estimated cost of just under $400 billion over 10 years, it was the largest entitlement program in more than 40 years, and the debate broke down along party lines.
This is a 15-minute vote.
But when it came time to vote, the Republican leadership discovered that a number of key Republican congressmen had defected and joined the Democrats, arguing that the bill was too expensive and a sellout to the drug companies. Dan Burton and Walter Jones were among them.
They're supposed to have 15 minutes to leave the voting machine open, and it was open for almost 3 hours. And the votes were there to defeat the bill for 2 hours and 45 minutes. And we had leaders going around and gathering around individuals, trying to twist their arms to get them to change their votes.
Mr. Speaker, I move reconsideration. I did not, thanks to your arm twisting.
It was horrible. I mean, we had a good friend from Michigan, Nick Smith, and they even threatened to work against his son who wanted to run for his seat when he retired. I saw a woman, a member of the House, a lady, crying when they came around her trying to get her to change her votes. It was ugly.
On this vote, the yeas are 220 and nays are 215. The conference vote is agreed to.
When the prescription drug bill finally passed shortly before dawn in the longest roll call in the history of the House of Representatives, much of the credit went to former Congressman Billy Tozan of Louisiana, who steered the bill through the House.
No, it's just a messy process. I mean, the old adage about if you like sausage or laws, you should not watch either one of them being made is true. It's a messy process.
The voting machines were open for 3 hours. Why?
Because the vote wasn't finished.
You didn't have the votes.
No, it wasn't finished.
And arms were still being twisted, right?
People were being talked to.
Walter Jones said it was the ugliest night he had ever seen in politics in 22 years.
Well, he's a young member. Had he been around for 25 years, he'd have seen some uglier nights.
But it certainly wasn't ugly for the drug lobby, which invested more than $10 million in campaign contributions during the last election and has been a source of lucrative employment opportunities for congressmen when they leave office. Former Senators Dennis DeConcini and Steve Sims, and former congressmen like Tom Downey, Vic Fazio, Bill Paxson, and former House Minority Leader Robert Michael all registered as lobbyists for the drug industry and worked on the prescription drug bill.
The other members wish to change their votes.
Why was the drug lobby so interested in this bill, and what did it have to gain? Ron Pollock, the executive director of Families USA, a nonpartisan healthcare watchdog group, says it all boiled down to a key provision in the legislation. It prohibited Medicare and the federal government from using its vast purchasing power to negotiate lower prices directly from the drug companies.
What was the main focus of the lobbying effort?
Well, the key goal was to make sure there'd be no interference in the drug companies' ability to charge high prices and to continue to increase those prices.
And whose idea was that?
There's no question that this was prompted by the pharmaceutical lobby.
The drug industry says that competition among private insurance plans that service the Medicare program help keep prices low. But Families USA reported in a January study that Medicare patients are being charged nearly 60% more for the top 20 drugs than veterans pay under a program run by the Veterans Administration. What was the logic, or what was the idea or the rationale behind not giving the government the ability to negotiate drug prices?
It was simply that the drug companies didn't want it. They wanted to make as much money as possible, and if there's negotiation, like there is in other countries around the world, then they're going to have their profit margin reduced.
Before the vote, Congress was told the program would cost a whopping $395 billion over the first 10 years. In fact, Medicare officials already knew it was going to cost a lot more.
Within 2 weeks after the bill was passed, everybody knew it was going to cost well over $500 billion. Many members of the Congress that voted for it said, I would never have voted for it had I known that. They misled us.
Medicare Chief Actuary Richard Foster later told Congress that he revised the cost estimate to $534 billion before the vote, but was told to withhold the numbers from Congress if he wanted to keep his job.
And there struck me as a political basis for making that decision. I considered that inappropriate and, in fact, unethical.
Foster says the person who told him to withhold the revised cost estimates from Congress was Medicare boss Tom Scully.
I want to thank Tom Scully and the whole staff at HHS and CH11.
Scully was the administration's lead negotiator on the prescription drug bill. At the same time, he was also negotiating a job for himself with a high-powered Washington law firm, where he later became a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry.
He was negotiating for his job at the same time that the Medicare legislation was being considered. He wound up taking this job 10 days after the president signed the legislation.
It is but one example of the incestuous relationship between Congress and the industry, and just one of the reasons the pharmaceutical lobby almost never loses a political battle that affects its bottom line. Former Congressman Billy Tozan, who helped push the prescription drug bill through the House, didn't disagree.
Has this bill been good for the drug industry?
It's been good for the patients whom the drug industry represents.
And in terms of profits for the drug companies?
In terms of profits and volumes, yes.
Your old friend John
Yes.
Dingell
Yes.
says of the 1,500 bills over the last 8 years dealing with pharmaceutical issues, the drug companies almost without exception have gotten what they wanted.
Yeah, I would think he's correct. They've done fairly well.
But why has this lobby been so successful?
I believe it's because they stood for the right things.
If former Congressman Tozan sounds a lot like a lobbyist for the drug industry, that's because now he is.
Billy Tozan of the House of Representatives did great work on this bill.
Just 6 weeks after the prescription drug bill was signed into law, Tozan began discussions with the pharmaceutical industry to become its chief lobbyist in Washington. He says,
That's the truth.
in fairness to Billy Tozan and former Medicare chief Tom Scully, they weren't the only public officials involved with the prescription drug bill who later went to work for the pharmaceutical industry. Just before the vote, Tozan cited the people who had been most helpful in getting it passed.
And I specifically want to thank the staffs of our committees. From Ways and Means, John McManus, who did such a great job.
Within a few months, McManus left Congress and started his own lobbying firm. Among his new clients were Pharma, Pfizer, Lilly, and Merck.
From the majority side of the Finance Committee, Linda Fishman.
Fishman left to become a lobbyist with the drug manufacturer Amgen.
Not the least of all, but the Energy and Commerce Committee staff who toiled so hard for us. Chief of Staff Pat Morrissey.
Morrissey took a job lobbying for drug companies Novartis and Hoffman LaRoche.
And Jeremy Allen.
He went to Johnson & Johnson.
Kathleen Weldon and Jim Barnett.
She went to lobby for Biogen, a biotech company. He left to lobby for Hoffman LaRoche.
They did a marvelous job for this House, and we owe them a debt of thanks. Thank you all.
In all, at least 15 congressional staffers, congressmen, and federal officials who worked on the prescription drug bill left to go to work for the pharmaceutical industry, whose profits were increased by several $billions.
They have unlimited resources, unlimited. And when they push real hard to get something accomplished in the Congress of the United States, they can get it done.